our mental health awareness. Another week, another great episode. Mental health through song.
Yes, this is an interesting question because pundits have asked if music can heal. Consider practical applications by age group as suggested by an American songwriter article. For children, regular exposure to simple songs teaching theological truth creates foundational cognitive structures that protect against later mental health struggles. Teenagers who are actively forming identity benefit enormously from music that celebrates commitment, authenticity, and transcendent purpose rather than the fragmentation that contemporary pop music often promotes. Adults experiencing midlife struggles or elderly people facing loneliness or cognitive decline can use strategic musical engagement to maintain mental health. Consider Dietrich Bonhoeffer, imprisoned by the Nazis, sustaining himself through memorized hymns and scripture songs. He wrote from prison about how internal music resources provided psychological and spiritual formation that external circumstances couldn't touch. This isn't just a historical anecdote, it's a model for building resilience against whatever challenges we face.
Yes. And Mr. Mink, let's dig deeper into the mechanism. Why specifically does Christian music have these therapeutic effects? What's happening neurologically?
Neuroscience reveals that music affects multiple brain systems simultaneously in ways that purely cognitive or emotional interventions cannot match. When you sing a hymn, you're activating language centers, processing lyrics, memory systems, recalling melody and words, motor cortex, producing voice, limbic system, experiencing emotion, and prefrontal cortex, integrating meaning. This simultaneous multi system activation reveals and explains why musical memory persists even in advanced dementia. It's encoded redundantly across multiple neural networks. But Christian music adds additional elements that secular music lacks. The theological content provides what psychologists call cognitive reappraisal, literally changing how you interpret experience. When you're anxious and sing, God is our refuge and strength, and ever present health and trouble, you're not just expressing an emotion, you're actively reframing reality from a transcendent perspective. This reframing operates at multiple levels. Consciously, you're affirming theological truth, but the music carries these truths past rational defenses into emotional and even semantic systems. The melody creates emotional associations, the rhythm entrains physiological responses, and the communal aspect, when sung with others, activates social bonding neurochemistry. Research on oxytocin, the bonding hormone, shows its release during communal singing. This creates feelings of safety, trust, and connection. Early Christian communities singing together weren't just worshiping, they were generating neurochemical states that protected mental health. The lonely, anxious teenager singing in their bedroom can't access this communal benefit, which partly explains the mental health crisis among young people who consume music individually through headphones rather than creating it communally. The music of the 1960s and 70s sometimes achieved similar effects through communal performance. Folk music traditions where people gathered to sing together. Pete Seeger's Turn, Turn, Turn from 1965, adapted from Ecclesiastes, being performed at protests and gatherings, created shared emotional and neurochemical experiences. The song was later a #1 hit by the Byrds. Even rock concerts, for all their problems, generated communal bonding through shared musical experience that protected against isolation. The specific content of Christian music matters neurologically. Songs about divine love and secure identity activate what neuroscientists call studying attachment call safety circuits, neural networks that create feelings of security and calm. When someone with anxious attachment patterns repeatedly sings about God's unchanging love, they're quite literally rewiring attachment circuitry towards security. The eschatological content, the hope for ultimate redemption and renewal, activates future oriented brain systems in ways that counter depression's characteristics inability to imagine positive futures. Depression shrinks time perspective to immediate suffering, but songs about eternal hope expand temporal horizons. This isn't more metaphorical, it's a measurable difference in how the brain processes past, present, and future. The element of transcendence in Christian music engages what some neuroscientists call the spiritual brain, neural networks involved in experiences of awe, wonder, and connection to something beyond the self. Research shows that transcendent experiences correlate with mental health, life satisfaction, and resilience. Regular engagement with music that points beyond immediate circumstances creates neural patterns supportive of these beneficial experiences. The rhythmic elements activate motor systems and entrain physiological rhythms. Certain musical tempos can slow heart rate, deepen breathing, and activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system that counteracts stress response. Traditional hymn tempos often fall in ranges that naturally calm anxiety. The repetitive structure of many Christian songs, verses and choruses repeating with variations, shows how memory consolidation works. The brain strengthens neural pathways through repetition, so songs with repeated refrains create stronger memory traces. This is why Amazing Grace or How Great Thou Art remain accessible even when other memories fade. They've been repeated so often that they've encoded in exceptionally stable neural networks. Contemporary worship music sometimes loses these neurological benefits by emphasizing novelty over repetition, performance over participation, and emotional manipulation over truth filled content. The therapeutic power comes not from the musical style, but from the content combined with communal practice and repetitive engagement. In conclusion, Christian music works therapeutically because it simultaneously engages multiple brain systems, providing effects that purely secular or individualistic musical approaches cannot replicate.
Mr. Mick, how do we move from individual application to a broader cultural renewal? Can music really help heal our fragmented society?
History suggests that cultural renewal often begins with the recovery of shared songs that carry a renewing vision. The civil rights movement wasn't built primarily on arguments or legislation. It was sustained through songs like We Shall Overcome and Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around that created communal resilience, reinforced shared vision, and generated emotional energy for sustained struggle. These songs drew heavily on Christian tradition, gospel music's theological confidence, and communal power applied to social justice. Martin Luther King Jr. understood that movements require more than correct ideas. They need emotional and spiritual sustenance that only music can provide. The freedom songs created what we might call collective resilience, groups maintaining hope and courage through shared singing, even when circumstances were desperate. The music of the 1950s to the 70s, despite emerging during turbulent times, helped maintain some social cohesion. Songs like What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong in 1967 reminded listeners of beauty and goodness even amid Vietnam, race riots, and assassinations. Armstrong's gravelly voice and the song's simple lyrics about trees, roses, babies, and friendship pointed toward fundamental goods that transcended political division. Or consider Creedence Clearwater Revival's Have You Ever Seen the Rain from 1971, which acknowledged confusion and difficulty while maintaining a sense that meaning and beauty persist even in chaos. John Fogerty's song spoke to a generation experiencing cultural upheaval while avoiding either naive optimism or cynical despair. Contemporary culture's musical fragmentation mirrors and reinforces social fragmentation. Everyone retreats into individualized playlists, earbuds blocking communal sound. We've lost shared musical vocabulary, the songs that previous generations could all sing together at weddings, funerals, and gatherings. This loss weakens the social fabric because we lack shared emotional language. Recovery of congregational singing could model broader cultural renewal. Churches becoming places where diverse people regularly sing together might demonstrate possibilities for human community that secular culture increasingly struggles to imagine. When conservatives and liberal, young and old, rich and poor stand together singing the same truths, they embody an alternative to the tribal fragmentation dominating contemporary life. But this requires recovering songs worthy of such community, music that's theologically rich, emotionally authentic, musically memorable, and socially unifying. Much contemporary worship music fails on one or more of these criteria, being either theologically thin, emotionally manipulative, musically forgettable, or stylistically divisive. The great hymns of Christian tradition meet all criteria. Holy, Holy, Holy works equally well in traditional, contemporary, or any American musical style. Come, Thou Fount of Every Blessing combines theological depth with emotional accessibility. It is Well with My Soul speaks to suffering across cultures and generations. These songs can create unity precisely because they point beyond cultural particulars to transcendent truths. Cultural renewal also requires creating new music that carries timeless truths in contemporary forms. The 1960s and 70s did this successfully. Artists like Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, and Johnny Cash created new songs that carried forward traditional moral vision. Cash's Man in Black from 1971 explained why he wore black for the poor, the prisoner, the lonely, the suffering. This is prophetic Christianity in musical form. The broader culture desperately needs music that celebrates commitment over hookup culture, perseverance over victimhood, hope over despair, and community over fragmentation. But such music requires artists and audiences who value these things, a cultural shift that music can help create but cannot accomplish alone. Churches and families choosing music intentionally create microcultures that can influence broader society. When enough people recover practices of communal singing, memorize truth filled songs, and deliberately choose music that builds rather than destroys, cultural momentum shifts. The early church transformed Roman culture partly through its distinctive music, songs of hope and joy sung even in persecution. Pagan observers noted how Christians sang at martyrdom, how their communities were characterized by music that celebrated what paganism couldn't imagine: secure identity, divine love, and ultimate hope. This musical witness proved more compelling than a philosophical argument. In conclusion, cultural renewal through musical recovery is possible, but requires intentional recovery of communal singing practices, exactly what early Christian communities demonstrated through centuries of singing their way towards civilization shaping influence.
Mr. Merrick, what is the most important takeaway about music, mental health, and Christian wisdom?
The most crucial insight is what neuroscience is discovering about music's therapeutic power. Religious thinkers and Christian authors have known and systemically applied for millennia. An American songwriter article celebrates researchers discovering that music helps dementia patients, but St. Augustine prescribed psalm singing for troubled souls 1600 years ago. Contemporary therapy rediscovers what the church fathers practiced as a basic spiritual discipline. This isn't just historical curiosity, it's practical wisdom desperately needed today. The mental health crisis among young people, particularly liberal adolescent girls experiencing depression and anxiety at rates exceeding 50%, requires more than clinical intervention. It requires recovery of communities and practices that protect psychological health through formative rather than merely corrective approaches. Music shaped by Judeo Christian wisdom provides this formative protection. When young people regularly sing truths about secure identity, divine love, transcendent purpose, and ultimate hope, they develop cognitive and emotional patterns that prevent the fragmentation and despair characterizing contemporary culture. This isn't religious propaganda, it's a therapeutic intervention confirmed by both ancient practice and modern neuroscience. The contrast between the uplifting music of the 1950s and 70s and contemporary culture's musical landscape reveals what we've lost. Those earlier generations, for all their flaws, maintained some connection to traditions, recognizing that humans need more than individual freedom and self expression. They need commitment, community, transcendent meaning, and hope grounded in something beyond circumstances. Songs celebrating covenant love, like Stand By Me by Benny King from 1961, or communal resilience, like Lean on Me by Bill Withers from 1972, carries psychological wisdom that contemporary hookup culture actively undermines. These weren't just entertainment, they were formative influences teaching listeners how to think about relationships, community, and human nature in ways that supported rather than destroyed mental health. The recovery of music as therapy requires both individual and communal action. Individuals can choose music intentionally, memorize songs that reinforce truth, and use specific music strategically for specific struggles. Families can institute practices of shared singing and carefully curate musical environments. Churches can recover congregational singing, choose music for therapeutic content rather than just aesthetic preference, and develop musical prescriptions for common struggles. But ultimate renewal requires theological recovery, understanding that humans are created in God's image, fallen but redeemable, possessing inherent dignity and eternal purpose. This anthropology, when internalized through music, creates psychological resilience that secular frameworks struggle to provide. You can survive almost anything if you know your worth doesn't depend on circumstances, achievements, or others' approval, but on divine love that nothing can change. The early Christians understood this profoundly. They sang through persecution, poverty, and plague because their music carried truths more powerful than their circumstances. Modern believers need to recover the same practice, not as archaic ritual, but as sophisticated psychological intervention that both ancient wisdom and contemporary science confirm as profoundly therapeutic. The work ahead involves recovering what's been lost while creating what's needed. Traditional practices adapted for contemporary context, timeless truths expressed in accessible forms, and communal experiences that demonstrate alternatives to cultural fragmentation. Music can serve this renewal because it operates at levels deeper than argument, creating emotional associations and neural patterns that shape consciousness in ways no other medium can match. Martin Luther was right. Music is one of the most magnificent and delightful presents God has given us, a gift that drives out the devil and makes people cheerful. This isn't a pious metaphor, it's a clinical observation about music's power to heal depression, counter anxiety, and restore fragmented identity. The mental health crisis of our age requires the recovery of this wisdom. The American Songwriter article concludes by suggesting that songs stuck in your head offer potential benefits to your long term mental health and memory. This understates the case dramatically. The right songs, carrying a life giving truth and sung in community, doesn't just help memory, they protect psychological health, create resilience, foster hope, and ultimately point toward the transcendent realities that alone can sustain human flourishing amid the inevitable difficulties of existence. In conclusion, the convergence of ancient Christian wisdom and contemporary neuroscience reveals that music is not an optional luxury, but an essential element of human flourishing, and transcendent hope offers our best path toward healing both individual souls and broken culture.
So, Mr. Mac, what does research show?
A fascinating study from the University of Amsterdam in 2014 revealed something remarkable about human memory. Certain songs can be recalled instantly, even after decades, with just a few seconds of musical fragment triggering complete recognition. Researchers discovered that hit songs by Elvis Presley, ABBA, and the Spice Girls possess what they called catchiness, an almost supernatural ability to lodge themselves in long term memory. But here's what the American Songwriter article covering this research missed. Excuse me. Religious thinkers, philosophers, and Christian authors recognized music's healing power centuries before modern neuroscience began studying dementia and memory loss. Dr. Ashley Burgoyne from the University of Amsterdam told BBC that music has a very powerful effect on memory, more powerful than many other memory triggers. He noted that favorite music could enliven people from suffering from dementia, and that these memories doesn't seem to fade. Yet this observation echoes what St. Augustine wrote in his Confessions around 397 AD, when he described how hymns and psalms moved him to tears, and how the music of lovely songs to which David's Psalter is sung brought healing to his troubled soul. The contrast between the uplifting music of the 1950s to the 1970s and today's cultural landscape reveals something profound about what we've lost. Consider Elvis Presley's Can't Help Falling in Love from 1961, a song built on the 18th century French melody Plaisir d'amour that speaks of surrender to genuine love and commitment. The lyrics acknowledge wisdom. Wise men say only fools rush in while embracing the risk of an authentic relationship. This stands in stark opposition to contemporary hookup culture, which promises freedom through detachment but delivers isolation and emotional damage. What made that era's musical psychologically healing wasn't just catchiness, it was the worldview embedded in the melodies and lyrics. These songs reflected Judeo Christian values about love, commitment, perseverance, and hope. They offered counter narratives to despair and fragmentation. Augustine understood this when he wrote that a hymn contains these three things: song, praise, and that of God. Praise, then, or God in song, is called a hymn. The early Christian church didn't just use music in worship, they understood it as a therapeutic intervention. The desert fathers and mothers of the third and fourth centuries prescribed psalm singing as a remedy for spiritual depression and anxiety. St. John Chrysostom wrote in the fourth century that nothing so uplifts the mind, giving it wings and freeing it from the earth, as harmonious melody and divine song. This wasn't metaphorical language, it was clinical observation about music's power to heal troubled souls. In conclusion, while contemporary neuroscience is discovering music's therapeutic potential for dementia patients, early Christian thinkers recognized and systemically applied music's healing properties for mental and spiritual health more than 15 centuries ago, understanding that certain melodies could restore fragmented minds and troubled hearts.
Indeed, so Mr. Meg, so the early Christians really saw music as more than just worship. They understood it as actual medicine for mental health.
Absolutely. The church fathers developed sophisticated theories about how music affects human psychology and spiritual well being. St. Basil the Great, writing in the fourth century, explained that God blended the light of melody with doctrine so that through the pleasantness and softness of the sound, we might unawares receive what was useful in the words. He understood that music bypasses rational resistance and speaks directly to the emotional and spiritual centers of human consciousness. This aligns remarkably with what the American Songwriter article describes, that musical memories doesn't seem to fade, even in dementia patients. But the early Christians went further, recognizing that music doesn't just preserve memory, it shapes character and heals wounded souls. St. Athanasius wrote that the Psalms, when sung, become like a mirror to the person singing them, so that he might perceive himself and the emotions of his soul. Consider how this worked in practice. When someone struggled with depression or anxiety, what they called heaviness of heart, spiritual directors prescribed specific psalms to particular melodies. Psalm 42: As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, O God, addressed spiritual thirst and existential longing. Psalm 23: The Lord is my shepherd, countered fear and insecurity. These weren't merely texts to be read, they were songs to be embodied through melody. The music of the 1950s to the 1970s often carried similar therapeutic power because it emerged from a cultural soil still fertilized by the Christian worldview. Johnny Cash's I Walk the Line from 1956 expresses covenant faithfulness in a romantic relationship. Because you're mine, I walk the line. This is radical counter programming to contemporary culture that treats commitment as oppressive rather than liberating. The song's simple, steady rhythm mirrors the constancy it celebrates, fidelity as a foundation for flourishing rather than a barrier to freedom. Or take Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come from 1964, which addresses suffering and injustice while maintaining transcendent hope. Cooke sings of friendship, of hardship and discrimination, yet the refrain promises redemption. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is going to come. This reflects the Christian virtue of hope, not naive optimism, but confident expectation grounded in divine promises. St. Paul wrote that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. St. John Chrysostom understood music's power to combat what we now call cognitive distortions. He wrote that the psalms which are sung in this fashion have a certain soothing effect, which calms the passions of the soul and helps quench the fires of the emotions. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy tries to help people identify and challenge distorted thinking patterns, but the early church used music to accomplish similar ends, replacing anxious thoughts with truth filled melodies. The therapeutic mechanism was grounding identity in divine love rather than human approval. When early Christians sang, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine from the Song of Solomon, they internalized the truth that their worth came from God's unchanging commitment, not their performance or others' validation. This created psychological resilience that contemporary young people desperately need. St. Augustine described his own healing through music in vivid terms. How greatly did I weep in your hymns and canticles, deeply moved by the voices of your sweet speaking church. Those voices flowed into my ears, and the truth was distilled into my heart. And from my heart there overflowed a tide of devotion, and my tears ran down, and I was happy in them. In conclusion, the church fathers didn't just appreciate music aesthetically, they prescribed it therapeutically, understanding that certain melodies combined with truth filled lyrics could heal depression, counter anxiety, and restore fragmented identity in ways that anticipated modern neuroscience while going deeper than contemporary therapeutic approaches.
Mr. Mick, as we wind up, the Christian understanding of music's healing power obviously draws heavily from a Jewish tradition. How does Jewish wisdom specifically contribute to this therapeutic use of song?
The Jewish tradition gave Christianity its foundational text for musical therapy, the Book of Psalms. These 150 songs function as ancient Israel's mental health manual, addressing every emotional state from despair to ecstasy, from rage to peace, from confusion to clarity. What makes the Psalms psychologically sophisticated is their refusal to suppress difficult emotions while ultimately directing them toward divine relationship and hope. Consider Psalm 88, which Jewish and Christian tradition both recognize as addressing severe depression. The psalmist cries, I am overwhelmed with troubles and my life draws near to death. You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. This isn't pious pretense, it's raw acknowledgement of psychological suffering. Yet, even in this darkest psalm, is directed toward God, maintaining a relationship even in despair. The therapeutic principle is profound. You can bring your worst emotional states to divine presence without fear of rejection. The Jewish sages understood what modern psychology calls emotional regulation, the capacity to experience strong feelings without being overwhelmed by them. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote that the Psalms are the soul's x ray, showing us the spiritual condition of humanity. By singing these songs regularly, communities internalized patterns of healthy emotional expression that prevented the kind of suppression that leads to mental illness. This contrasts sharply with contemporary culture's approach to emotions. Today's young people are often taught either to suppress negative feelings, which leads to depression and anxiety, or to trust feelings as infallible guides, which lead to instability and poor decisions. The Psalms model a third way, fully feeling and expressing emotions while submitting them to transcendent truth. The music of the 1960s and 70s sometimes captured this Jewish Christian wisdom beautifully. Simon and Garfunkel's Bridge Over Troubled Water from 1970 expresses the same theology as Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength and ever present help in trouble. Paul Simon, drawing on his Jewish heritage and gospel music traditions, created a song that offers genuine comfort without minimizing suffering. The song acknowledges pain while promising steadfast support, exactly the pattern we see through the Psalms. The Jewish practice of communal psalm singing created what psychologists now call co regulation, people learning to manage emotions through shared experience. When the congregation sang together, individuals who came in despair found their emotions gradually reshaped by the community's collective voice. This is radically different from today's social media culture, where young people experience what we might call dysregulation amplification. Their anxiety and depression are reinforced rather than healed by online communities that reward victimhood narratives. Rabbi Heschel observed that the Psalms are an invitation to prayer, counseling, a guide to faith. Jewish tradition understood that regular engagement with these songs, the morning and evening prayers, the Sabbath liturgies, created cognitive patterns that protected mental health. By repeatedly singing about God's faithfulness, steadfast love, and deliverance, communities internalize resilience building narratives. The contrast with hookup culture is stark. Contemporary secular culture tells young people that sexual freedom without commitment leads to flourishing, but research consistently shows the opposite. Casual sexual relationships correlate with depression, anxiety, and low self worth. The Jewish wisdom embedded in songs like Women of Valor from Proverbs 31, traditionally sung on Friday nights, celebrates committed partnership, feminine strength, and family stability, values that actually produce psychological well being. The Psalms also model what psychologists call cognitive reframing, looking at difficulties from different perspectives. Psalm 73 begins with the singer troubled by the prosperity of the wicked and questioning God's justice, but by the end reaches peace through remembering eternal perspective. Whom I have high in heaven but you, and earth has nothing I desire besides you. This isn't a denial of injustice, it's locating ultimate meaning beyond temporary circumstances. The Western musical tradition is rich and restorative. In conclusion, Jewish wisdom gave Christianity a complete therapeutic system disguised as a songbook. The Psalms provided patterns for emotional expression, communal support, cognitive reframing, and identity formation that modern psychology is only beginning to appreciate and that contemporary culture desperately needs to rediscover.
Yes, and Mr. Mick, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Mental Health Through the Songs explores how music becomes a powerful language for expressing pain, healing trauma, and restoring hope when words alone fall short. Across cultures and generations, songs have given a voice to anxiety, grief, resilience, and recovery, reminding listeners that they are not alone in their struggles. Mr. Meg, would you like to plug in something?
I appreciate the opportunity. Write the book, grow the business. Connect with me on LinkedIn, GMIC, the Dr. Digital Smith, PhD. Listen to the Dr. of Digital podcast. Pick up a couple of volumes I have on Amazon Burning America and On Track Ian Hunter.
Yes, people, let's about Mr. Meg, the Dr. Digital, and please do listen to our other podcasts, Music 101, Sex 101, and Love Letters. So, Mr. Meg, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my friend. Till next time, Deus Volt.
Modicum people, see you soon.